I can trace the origins of this talk to a tweet following remotely an event hosted by the University of Sheffield's Grantham Centre on the value of nature. I saw my colleague Professor Lorraine Maltby, a panellist that evening, quoted, "You can't save everything, have everything, all the time. You save an idea of nature. Whose idea is it?" This took me back to 1999 and the inaugural student conference on conservation science in Cambridge. I was feeling pretty pleased with myself. I'd just given my first conference talk and it seemed to have gone okay. I was meeting lots of interesting people, sharing the cosy impression that our research was on track to make some real difference to conservation efforts. Then, eminent conservation biologist Stuart Pimm stood up to give the plenary. He showed a map, something like this, displaying the world's hotspots of biodiversity, those areas in which exceptionally high numbers of endemic species are under exceptional degrees of threat from human actions. He called on us to focus all our efforts on those parts of the world where there actually was some diversity to conserve, and to stop fiddling around with inconsequential bits of so-called conservation biology, while biodiversity hotspots burned. I'm not disputing the importance of Stuart's message, or of these areas, yet if you superimpose the totality of my global ambit as of 1999, you will see that somehow I had managed to sustain a love of nature, right through school and university, had indeed embarked upon an ecology PhD, with only my time on the highly developed French Mediterranean coast bringing me close to even a moderately warm spot. I did not feel as if my life had been naturally impoverished, and despite the doubts of another very eminent conservation biologist, Michael Soule, I did, as it happens, feel rather attuned to nature. This is the view from my childhood home in the garden world of agricultural Northamptonshire, the fields and allotments leading down to the spinney of trees along the brook, with its scruffy, untended island, rope swing, and non-native pheasants to stalk. Jeff Dyer writes nicely about the thrill of wilderness around the corner, as somewhere you explored with independent access, in his case, just outside Cheltenham, no wilder than the agricultural landscapes and the old railway lines of my Northamptonshire adventure playground, where I spent hours immersed in nature without ever really realising it, until an A-level biology field trip to the wilds of South Devon gave the name ecology to this messing around outside and suggested a career. I love that landscape still, but like to feel I'm slightly more adventurous than poor old Mole. An animal of field and hedgerow I may be, but as an ecology graduate I remained keen to see what nature in the rough might have to offer. But even when I finally reached those biodiversity-rich lower latitudes, notions of wilderness were still not clear-cut. An early adventure took us to the Yucatan in Mexico, where we climbed the pyramid at Chichen Itza to look out over unbroken jungle, which gave a suitably primordial impression. Yet, of course, 1,000 years ago, Chichen Itza had been among the largest Mayan cities and surrounded by remarkably intensive agriculture. I doubt too many trees would have been visible from our vantage point back then. My next trip will take me back to the same part of the world, this time, though, aboard the Louisiana University's Marine Consortium's RV Pelican to explore the deep sea of the Gulf of Mexico. Now surely that is still a true wilderness. Well, maybe. But then look at this picture, which Southampton deep-sea biologist John Copley captured at a depth of 2,300 metres near the Von Dam vent field on their 2013 expedition to the Cayman Trough. No human eyes had ever before seen this patch of seafloor, and possibly never will again, but it had already been colonised by the detritus of our civilization. So it's easy to agree with author Emma Marris in her assertion that nature is nowhere pristine, that our changing atmosphere, in which the concentrations of gases I learnt at school are now out of date, is merely a global and unavoidable confirmation that there is no going back, and that the nature which so nourishes us is now largely tended by us too. Against this backdrop, I take pleasure in small things. I love this tweet. Maris's thrill of the raccoon prints in the snow resonates. On this rather muddier walk with my daughter, there was nothing exotic, but a fine bracket fungus did catch our eye, and the beech trees lifted our spirits. Or take this hedge, which we planted soon after moving into our suburban house. The quickthorn and blackthorn soon knitted, and to our delight, in moved a quarrel of house sparrows. Then, just a week or so ago, the sparrows, never exactly quiet, grew noticeably agitated, and moved deeper into the thorns. Sure enough, a young male sparrowhawk set about the puzzle of extracting one, something he stuck at with increasingly visible frustration, for as long as it took me to locate and attach an appropriate lens to my camera, when he promptly gave up in disgust, and left me with a lovely memory, but no photo. More controversially, last summer, an anachronistic call over the garden, and this splendid creature landed in a neighbour's tree. I know these ring-necked parakeets are not native, have no business being in the UK, and that it should perhaps be a concern that they have apparently now reached Sheffield from their various other urban strongholds. But really, how can anyone fail to be thrilled by a parrot in the garden? And these small garden moments, the tadpoles and the froglets, the Peak District bilberries and midsummer grouse moors, purple with heather and buzzing with bees, together add up to a very rich experience. This is how we spent an hour last Sunday morning, 15 minutes walk from our home. This local common, these woods, are far from wild. By disturbing the rotting branches and their fungal and invertebrate communities for our shelter, we hardly did any favours to ecosystem function. Communion with nature was limited to a pair of bullfinches meekly cooing in the hedge, and up an oak seemingly designed to climb, an oak apple led to talk of wasps and galls. But the ordinariness is precisely the point. Such quotidian interactions with nature make it harder to envisage a world in which they can no longer occur, in which spectacularly wild high-definition Planet Earth sequels simply take us progressively further from our lived experience. I am a product of the managed landscapes of rural England, and I value the scruffiness around their periphery to such an extent that my vision of nature cannot fail to include it. I leave you with this quote from the novelist Mohsin Hamid. He is writing about the pervasive nostalgia currently dominating political and social life. I suggest that it applies equally to our natural environment. Hankering for past wildness is pointless. We need imaginations from all human perspectives to peer with madness and insight and unexpectedness and wisdom into the kind of nature we desire in a world of 10 billion people.